What's up, guys? Week one is over. Welcome to Daily Fantasy Week 2. I kind of wanted to recap Week 1, kind of things we did wrong, things we noticed. I guess a couple things. Let's start out with things that we noticed a little bit. Dak Prescott, kind of a big question mark. A lot of people were on him last week. Wasn't a big fan because of this exact reason. Either you hand the ball off or you throw it to Jason Witten 22 times. That's an exaggeration, but him and Cole Beasley, he barely targeted Dez, and then when he did, Dez was covered well. And I don't know if that's just a lost step for Dez or just good coverage or both. And then because of that, I'm kind of off somebody this week, but we'll get into this week. Some of the other things, Tajay Sharp paid off for us if you did play him. He was min price last week. He got boosted $1,000 or so. He's going to get the targets. He's number one in Tennessee. I know they suck, but like I said, this is daily. This isn't about who's good and who sucks. Who's getting the targets, right? So he got like 8 targets. He caught like 6 passes. Dude was a stud, right? And so these are the guys that you kind of want to keep an eye on. People like this, week in and week out, you want to call your shots with these kind of guys. You want to recognize when someone gets hurt, who's going to get the volume, kind of speaking for running backs, but you get the gist. Spencer Ware, prime example, bananas went off, right? I didn't have him, but I still came in third place in my 50-50s, and then my millionaire maker, I still doubled my money, which was nice. I probably could have done a little bit better than Million Maker. Quick recap of our cash game lineup. I had Alex Smith go for 32 points, Lamar Miller go for 18, Latavius Murray for 14, Michael Crabtree for 17, Allen Robinson for 13, Willie Snead 35. Big proponent. Also, I think this guy is going to be a week in, week out starter. I'm starting him this week again. We'll get into that. Jacob Tamme, another one, 2,800, man, cheap. The cheaper, the better at tight end. Tight end is one of those positions where if you spend $2,500 to $3,000 and he doesn't score but 2 or 3 points, I'm not going to cry about it because all I need for $3,000 for me to make money, I need him to hit 9 points. If he's lacking 5 points, I can pretty much guarantee that one of my other positions, aka Willie Snead, is going to make up that 6 or 7 points. As long as I'm paying down at a position and I know that another position is going to produce higher than what I expect, I'm not worried about it. So, LaShawn McCoy in the flex and DraftKings and Vikings defense did me well. Vikings D, they were like my third option. It just happened to be the best defense of the week, just for obvious reasons. My other ones did all right. I didn't really write the tournament ones down. I entered $3 and won a $5, and so I looked at the $1 million lineup, and that's one of the things I would like to do. Let's recap this as well, and kind of I'm trying to think of the thought process, like what the guy was thinking, like how was he thinking when he created this lineup, and why he did what he did, and because if we do things like that, then we can be successful in bigger tournaments. I can knock out 1 o'clock only 50-50s all day like there's nothing to it. It's just because that's all I've really played. Last year I did some tournaments. I just know that the odds of winning, you're basically throwing money away in tournaments. You're either going to come in the very bottom or the very top is how you want to set your lineup up. So the winning $1 million lineup, Drew Brees. All right. I could see why he picked Drew Brees, and I'll get to my synopsis here in a minute. So Drew Brees, Theo Riddick went for 27 points, Spencer Ware for 35 points, and I got Brandon Cooks 36 points, AJ Green 39 points, Willie Snead 35 points, Julius Thomas 17, Dante Moncrief 18 points, and the Packers defense for 5. For a grand total of 250 fantasy points. That's doing really well. That's knocking it out. I know that one of the tools, especially early on in the year, that a lot of pros like to use is the Vegas lines. And you can see the movement or you can see the total expected points of the game. So essentially kind of how I built my cash lineup was I looked at the Vegas odds for the 2 highest total point games. So essentially the total points Vegas will give you, is it 51.5? Is it 50? those are anything above 49 is generally a really high volume game. Which Oakland and New Orleans last week was a 51-point game projected, and Detroit and Indianapolis, or Indiana, excuse me, it was a 50.5-point game. So right there, those two things told me like I need Willie Snead and guys like that and Crabtree. I mean, you can tell that's generally one of the reasons why I picked those players is because they expected to have such a high scoring game. A lot of times it works out that way, sometimes it doesn't, but Vegas is right more times than they're wrong. So based on that, let's look at his lineup from the Oakland New Orleans game. Drew Brees. He had Brandon Cooks, Willie Snead, and so he did like a double stack, is what we call it in the industry. So you stack your QB and two wide receivers. It wasn't that difficult. I mean, all he did was take the QB who's going to pass the most this week or expected to, and Brandon Cooks, the number one receiver and the number two receiver. I mean, if Drew Brees is going to throw 3 to 4 touchdowns, and you already kind of knew that because of last year a little bit, and you kind of expected it this year, he actually did. Those two guys, you kind of expect to get most of that workload. So it's not surprising to me he picked those three guys. Detroit and Indianapolis. So Detroit, Theoretic. I wasn't on Theoretic, and I tried to figure out why. And that was one of the biggest things I was trying to figure out is how did he get on Theoretic, right? So I did a little digging. It turns out that the Colts defensive line is actually kind of injured. They're not there 100%, and apparently it's the inside linemen, and because of that, their backups suck. And I didn't know that. And this is one of those little tidbits where if you do enough research or you're good enough, you can pick up on these little cues that the general public doesn't really figure out, and then it can win you $1 million. I think that was the play. I think Theoretic is really what won him this week. I mean, and this is kind of so I was kind of going through, and Dante Moncrief was the other one in that game. So the two highest scoring projected games, he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 players in that game. So that tells me that he was just targeting the highest volume games. So essentially, I mean, Ware was an obvious pick. I mean, I was on Ware. I think everyone's on Ware a little bit because of Jamal Charles. And especially last year, if you played daily, you know how much of an asset he was week in and week out when Jamal Charles was out. Him and Charcandrick West, you figured out which day to use them. And like I said before, man, A.J. Green, Brandon Cooks, Drew Brees were super obvious. They were like the highest projected on every website. Like they were like supposed to be the tits, and they were. Like I said, Theoretic, Dante Moncrief, I could see. You know, he's probably too expensive to get T.Y. Hilton, so he got Moncrief. One of the other points I like to bring up, Julius Thomas. He obviously paid up at tight end a little bit. And this is smart because a lot of people, like I say, when they play cash, you don't pay up at tight end. During tournaments, you do want to pay up tight end or play 2 tight ends, especially if you're on DraftKings, 1 in the tight end slot and 1 in the flex. It kind of gives you a differentiation. So a little bit of game theory for tournaments. You want to be different. I kind of touched on it last time. So one of the ways to be different is, one, he did a double stack, which he did Drew Brees and the 2 wide receivers from the same team. And the other thing he did was he paid up at tight end. So those are two things that differentiate him from the rest of the field. What was kind of odd to me, because if you think about it in DraftKings, right? So when you pick players, it goes from top to bottom. So like if I picked a wide receiver 1, 2, 3, right? So essentially in my head, I'm thinking if the way he left it was probably the way he picked it, right? So I was trying to break down how he went through and picked his lineup, and I feel like he took a top-down approach, whereas in cash you want to take a bottom-up. You want to take the most value guy, like the couple value guys at the bottom, and then you can fill the rest in gradually. He just went straight to the top. Drew Brees, AJ Green, super high, and Brandon Cooks, and said these guys are the ones, and then he kind of worked his way down. But what was really curious to me, it looks like he took Drew Brees and Brandon Cooks and AJ Green first because those are the way that it kind of Drew Brees, and then it has Brandon Cooks in the wide receivers first slot, AJ Green in the second slot, and then it's Willie Snead. Which, I mean, I could see that, okay, and that's fine. But what was really interesting to me was the running backs. He took Theo Riddick first before he took Spencer Ware. I wonder why that is. And maybe he did a little more research than the next guy and figured something out. That was probably the most interesting part of that whole thing to me. So week 2, moving on. So I've looked at some of the first thing I usually do is I like to look at the Vegas odds. So it kind of gives me an idea of some of the high scoring games, kind of like I explained earlier. One of the things that really stuck out to me this week is the San Francisco Carolina game. Carolina is favored at home by 13.5 points. Now that is crazy, especially for just right out like Vegas odds in general. To me, that tells me that they're going to blow San Francisco out. So typically what happens when that happens, they usually run the ball more, obviously. And after hearing some podcasts and stuff this week, I've kind of determined that, after last week, Cam Newton taking beating after beating after beating, I feel like they're just going to hand the ball off a lot or let him stay in the pocket and throw the ball. One of the things that I might hit on, and I've been going back and forth about this because is Jonathan Stewart. Jonathan Stewart last year was on and off. I mean, you had to pick the weeks to play him, but for the most part, he was pretty consistent, 15, 14, carries. I'm more of like a 20-plus guy carry, but in a game like this where he's just going to get fed the ball, if you tell me he's getting 20 touches, I might play him. Some of the other higher scoring games this week is New Orleans, 51.5 with the New York Giants, and Tampa Bay versus Arizona, 50 points total. And Arizona is favored by 7.5 over a touchdown at home. I don't know. Like, there's some of the things that I've kind of looked at the lineups and I kind of pieced together some of my thoughts. So to kind of give you an idea of how I set up my rosters, typically roster construction is pretty important when it comes to how you're going to put your lineup together. And one of the things that I like to do in cash games personally, I work from the bottom up. And one of the things is running backs are your most consistent week in and week out performance. You can kind of basically play the matchups and figure out how many carries he gets a game. And based on that, you can pretty much assure who's going to be in the top 5 that week or vice versa, which I called Ryan Matthews last week correctly. I said he's probably going to be a top 5. I did, however, miscall the Antonio Brown thing. I'm probably going to eat that one. But he was single covered, and he wasn't even covered by their best corner, which, like I said, is just weird. And even all the announcers were basically saying, like, what the hell was that about? So, that being said, this week, some of the things that I have noticed, I don't know if I'm going to go Antonio again. I mean, Brandon Marshall got pretty well covered last week, and I know Brandon Marshall. I know Antonio is a lot better than Brandon Marshall. Well, I wouldn't say a lot, but I just feel like Antonio's has more of a ceiling. And ODB, I mean, they shut Dez down, And one of the other things that I took away from this past week is that Giants versus New Orleans. Dak threw underneath a lot, right? So Dak was just underneath. So those are a couple of things that I've noticed last week. So I feel like maybe New Orleans is going to do the same thing. I mean, you're probably going to torch them. I feel like Brandon Cooks might get covered pretty well. And so I feel like Willie Snead is going to be left there in the middle of the field a lot. I feel like he's going to get a lot of volume. And I mean, hell, even last week he had 9 targets, right? So these are the things that I look for is targets and run attempts. So so I'm going to kind of run through and I look for whoever's got the highest amount of targets and or attempts versus the worst defense they could possibly play, you know. And then I kind of make a judgment call based on talent and who I want to play that week. So like I was talking about earlier, when it comes to roster construction, I start with running backs first because I don't want any hindrance on my running backs. I might come back at a later point and maybe at the very end swap a running back out. You know, I have one that may be a little bit lower because I'm overpaying a little bit for one, but I don't want any type of money to affect my judgment when it comes to running backs, and especially in cash. And then in flex position, I know it's a PPR, and everything says you should do a wide receiver in the flex for the biggest performance. But week in and week out in cash games last year, I put a running back there because they're going to give me my points that I know they're going to give me, and and it worked for me last week. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I started off going Miller. I mean, Miller had 28 attempts, and he's going against like the third worst defense right now as far as run goes. Jonathan Stewart, I might swap him out for wow, for Spencer Ware, just because of the PPR upside, and I'm worried that if Carolina goes up, it scares me a little bit. I mean, somebody's got to get the ball, right? So I have Stewart in there right now, and kind of the way I have it set up, I have Stewart and Calvin Benjamin, which I don't like. So I might go Spencer Ware, Calvin Benjamin, or I might just go Jonathan Stewart. The other guy I'm looking at, other than Calvin, is Deshaun Jackson this week. He had a ton of targets last week. I know they were playing soft after a while, but I just feel like I know Pittsburgh was just being real soft, but they almost lost that game still. But the matchup is there for Deshaun Jackson. The targets are going to be there. I'll have to kind of play with that. Wide receivers, Tajay Sharp. Come on. He got boosted $1,000. I mean, at $5,000, you're still getting 11 targets. Even if he catches half of those for 50 yards, you're still getting a 2 times value out of him right there. And if you throw a touchdown on top of that, or if he actually has a 100-yard game, I mean, that ain't nothing. That's going to be one of your plays. Like I said, Willie Snead earlier, he's got high upside. I feel like his targets are going to go up because of what happened last week. I know Dak is an underneath guy, but I feel like Brandon Cooks is going to be covered because Dez got pretty well covered as well last week. And I know Dez is coming off an injury, and then Dak didn't force feed him a ball, but he had 8 targets, I believe. And he only caught like half of them, like 5 or 4, and he dropped one in the end zone, but he was well covered. So, it could have been a different story, but at the same time, I just feel like if Brandon Cooks is covered or double covered, especially after last week's performance, Willie Snead is going to be probably getting 10 plus targets. If you give me an over and under of 9, I would say take the over. Calvin Benjamin last week had 12 targets, a lot of targets last week, and he was in there for 54% of the snaps. Something that they wanted to do last week was hinder him. They wanted him to play for about 35-40% of the snaps. Well, it didn't play out that way just because of the game script. This week, something I heard that was interesting, they said, because their plan was that last week, maybe this week, if they go up real fast, if they go up 2 touchdowns real quick, 3 touchdowns real quick, he might be in there 1 every 3 snaps, and that's a good point. So that's kind of why I'm leaning a little bit more Deshaun Jackson, Jonathan Stewart this week, and I might regret that a lot, and I hope I don't. Like I said before about the tight end, I punt is what I say. So CJ Uzomah, Uzomah. he is taking over for Tyler Eifert being out. He had like 6 targets last week. I might swap that out for Jacob Tamme, who had 8 targets last week. And especially if Julio is actually a little bit gimp, I feel like Tamme in the red zone. I mean, he had 8 targets. He was way overutilized, and I told you guys to play him last week. So between those two, I'm going to kind of play with that. I'll post my lineup later. DeAngelo Williams in the flex, like I said, I like to do a running back in the flex. He had 26 attempts last week. 26 attempts, that's a lot. That is a ton. And until Le'Veon Bell gets back, he's going to be the workhorse there. And he is playing one of the softest offenses. Like, this dude's a lock. You put Miller, put DeAngelo Williams in your lineup. I don't care what you do. If you're playing cash, you've got to have those guys. Especially, Miller may swap out for Spencer Ware, but I'm telling you, D. Wills, you got to have in there. And then for the defense, I have Panthers defense. I paid up a little bit for defense just because I could. Because I'm telling you, 13.5 points, I mean, I feel like they're going to shut them out for a while, but then they'll kind of be like, yeah, they scored a touchdown. That's kind of what I hate about that, but you just can't turn that down. So that being said, those are some of my takeaways for this week. I don't know, man. Like, I don't have any bold calls I can think of off the top of my head. I mean, some of the things I have noticed also, I feel bad for Devonta Freeman owners. I mean, Tevin Coleman's basically just taking like half, literally 50% of the snaps, and he's getting all the passing downs. So once Devonta Freeman goes down, Tevin Coleman is the man. So let's keep that in mind this week. Tight ends is probably the biggest thing I noticed. Like Jason Witten is like the baby blanket for Dak Prescott. So if you're gonna pay up maybe for tight end, I would go that route. So let's see. I don't know, man. I mean, that's kind of it. I mean, I kind of expect a lot of these guys to bounce back. I feel like Tennessee's going to bounce back a little bit. I feel like the Baltimore Ravens are going to come back a little bit too. I think Flacco's a sneaky play this week. I've been with Flacco. So Stafford, some of the QBs. That's my QB, by the way, is Stafford, because he is in the. I just think he's going to. He looked real good last week, honestly. He threw the ball a ton, 39 attempts, probably one of the top 3. And honestly, the last 10 games, including from last season, for the last 10 games, only 2 people have outscored him in fantasy per week, and that is Russell Wilson, and that is, who's the other one? I forgot who the other one was. Cam Newton. So, like, Stafford is third among all QBs for the last 10 games total. I just feel like that's pretty big, So I'm going Stafford. I've been kind of toying. I don't want to pay up for Drew Brees. I've been toying with going with Eli Manning or possibly going with my boy famous Jameis, but I feel like I might mix this up a little bit, my lineup. I mean, another guy I'm on is Vincent Jackson, who I think is going up against a rookie corner this week, and I feel like he's going to shred him. So that's another guy I might throw in here instead, kind of play with it. But I feel like Tajay Sharp is a must play. I feel like DeAngelo Williams, Lamar Miller, and Spencer Ware are like 3 guys that either you got to have 2 of those 3 guys in your lineup at least to win this week. So those are kind of my 2 cents, and I'm going to post my tournament lineup a little bit later. Like I said earlier, kind of reviewing the Millionaire Maker lineup. I'm kind of starting to build my tournament lineups top, bottom, top, down. So I got to think who I think is going to be the most scoring at each position and basically fill that first and then fill out the rest accordingly. So anyway, that being said, I'll post my lineups later. If you guys have any advice, if you guys are on somebody that I didn't mention, as far as wide receivers or running backs or anybody really, give me a shout or just post it up, and hopefully all your screens will be green next week. All right, man. Well, good luck to everybody, And this is your King Commissioner signing off.